When the milling industry in the 1880s began to turn whole wheat kernels into white flour to extend its shelf life, they didn't only lose many of the nutrients, such as vitamins and minerals, but they also lost 90% of the dietary fiber. And here is a story of the magic of fiber. To start with, dietary fiber only comes from plants, from all plants. Meat, dairy, and eggs have no fiber. Actually, dietary fiber is a very complex entity. Until just a few years ago, fiber, then thought of as roughage or bark, was considered a substance exclusively found in the outer layers of grains of plants. You know, wheat bran would fit that model, wouldn't it? We now know that fiber actually consists of a large number of different substances.
Welcome. I want to just welcome everyone to today's Ask Dr. Sal program, sponsored by Lifestyle Medicine Institute and the CHIP program. And if you, well, I'm just going to see if I can pull up a few things on here. Okay, just to get us started. So I want to welcome everyone, welcome past participants, welcome new people to the show. Again, I'll remind you at the start and at the end, if you have any questions, please add those into the chat box so that after a short monologue, I can get into answering some important questions that you may have. I like the way Dr. Deal talks about the magic of fiber, and obviously today's program is really all about fiber as your best friend, if you will. And before we really get into the heart of the program, I want you to listen to the next video, which is really talking about the complexity of fiber. So I think this next one is by Hans Deal again, the complexity of fiber. So we'll look at that next.
Actually, dietary fiber is a very complex entity. These dietary substances are bookended by soluble fiber on one end and insoluble fiber at the other. In between, we have many groupings like cellulose and lignans and hemicellulose, and then pectins and gums and mucilages. And all of these fiber have different functions, and they come from different sources. So therefore, taking a fiber supplement is not going to help you to get all the different kinds of fiber that we need. Some of these fibers are water-holding, like the fibrous wheat bran. This insoluble fiber acts like a sponge, holding water 7 times its own weight, which, to the relief of many, softens the stool and increases its volume. Others are gel-forming fibers, acting like stool softeners and stool lubricants. Still others enhance fermentability, which influences the growth of billions of needed bacteria in the colon, thus contributing to the immune system while also increasing colonic bulking.
So listen to all of the benefits that Hans talks about as far as fiber. It's not just one particular benefit, it's multiple. And again, the complexity of fiber is really very interesting. The next video that we'll look at is Darren Morton talking about what actually happens to different types of fiber that we eat. So we'll look at that video next, and then we'll chat a little bit more.
This is what nature intends for us to eat. And this is what we do with it. We process it and we refine it within an inch of its life. And in doing so, we remove most of the fiber. Have a look at what happens when I add water to this white flour. I'll tip the water in there. And as I start to mix it around, you can see that it begins to turn into a claggy, sticky mess. In fact, my mum used to make glue for us when we were kids out of this very stuff. Compare that to when I add water to this whole grain. This time you can see that the whole grain retains its consistency. It holds its form. It doesn't become sticky and claggy. Now you can imagine what this does inside our gastrointestinal tract as compared to this. This is one of the benefits of high fibre in our diet.
So I think I'm going to have to take a short break to call Darren and ask him, what does claggy actually mean? I joke around about that because my father was like that. He would make up words. So I'm not sure if that's a real word. Maybe somebody can look that up in the interim. Um, think about the 1980s and times in our lives when gasoline was in short supply. We'd all be driving to the gas station, waiting online for hours at a time to make sure that we get a full tank of gas so that we can get to work. But how does that, you're probably wondering, how does that have anything to do with today's program? What it has to do with is when you eat a plant-based diet, there is no shortage of gas. And this is really something funny to talk about, but obviously very important to talk about because it really seems to be one of the things that people often will say prevents them to really maintain a plant-based lifestyle. I think it's the reason a lot of people actually shy away from eating a lot of the cruciferous vegetables and other things that are very bulky and harder to digest, if you will. But is the gas really a bad thing? What does that actually represent? And the short answer, obviously, is no, it's not. We're going to hear next, again, from Hans Diehl talking about the excess gas and what that actually means and what we can do about it. So we'll put that video up next.
People sometimes come to me and say, now listen, aren't there any adverse effects? Oh, yes. There's one in particular. When people shift from a low-fiber diet to a high-fiber diet fairly rapidly, there's often, are you ready? A gas problem. Yeah, and here at CHIP, we never, ever have a gas shortage. It's always there. It always seems to happen every time, and it usually sets in after the first 10 days. That's why we always recommend to you during the second week after the program has begun, start walking outdoors. But I want to assure you that this too shall pass. It usually takes about 3 to 4 weeks, and then it's usually over, especially if you take your recommended daily 8 glasses of water. Think of this gas eruption as a civil war in your colon between 2 kinds of bacteria. There's one kind of bacteria that is fed by the low-fiber, high-fat diet, and there's another bacteria, the good bacteria, that is fed by the high-fiber, low-fat diet. Both of these kinds of bacteria love their residents. I mean, after all, they don't pay any rent. It's nice and warm in that colon. They're being fed, and they multiply by the billions. And as the diet changes, however, the initially dominant bacteria diminish, while the other bacteria begins to flourish. Now, both parties now begin to recognize that their survival is at stake. There's only room for one kind. And so both armies begin to think of war, and they begin to pull out their muskets. And as they fire these muskets, you can smell the gunpowder. But once the good bacteria have taken full and stable residence, everything is fine. No more war, no more muskets, no more smell of gunpowder. That is, unless you change your diet and it starts all over again. Don't you see how good nature is to us? It gives us all kinds of warning to keep us on the right track. Sometimes it's pain, and sometimes it's gas.
Sometimes it's pain or sometimes it's gas. Before I get into that, and actually that was a great lead in because Hans talked about the 2 kinds of bacteria in the colon, and I want to talk about that for a few minutes, but I'll have to thank Kathy for sending a message that claggy is actually a real word that means lumpy and sticky. So thank you, Kathy, for that one. That's great. We all learned something today. And Hans talking about the 2 types of bacteria, and it's not just 2 individual bacteria that are in the colon. So we've all heard this term, the microbiome. The microbiome is the environment inside your colon where you have trillions of bacteria that really will help to either keep us healthy or not. And when we actually look at the microbiome, the types of bacteria that are in the colon of different groups of individuals, so we can look at people that eat more plant-based foods, and then we can look at people that eat more of the standard American foods, the meat and dairy. And what evidence and research actually shows is that there are completely different types of bacteria in those two groups of people. And beyond that, what we know is that because there are differences in the type of bacteria, the individuals are either susceptible or not to certain types of illnesses. There's a difference in the way we digest our food. The bacteria actually help us to digest our food, to absorb, to make vitamins, and to keep us healthy. So I want to look at the next video, because the next video talks about the difference between the standard American or Western diet and an optimal diet. And we'll talk more about what that actually means in relation to the microbiome on the other side of this next video.
So as you begin to summarize the contrasts between an optimal diet and the typical Western diet, here, take a look. The optimal diet has at least 35 plus grams of fiber, while the Western diet only has about 10 to 15 grams. The consistency of the stool is soft on the optimal diet versus hard on the Western diet. The stool size is much larger on the optimal diet. The stool weight is much higher, and the frequency, it's a daily bowel movement, just about. But it's only 2 or 3 times in the Western diet, and it's usually with agony, with straining, no more. And the transit time on the optimal diet, what you eat today is out tomorrow. Nuts on the Western diet, it takes 3 to 4 days before you find it again. Yes. And constipation, it's just a memory for most people on the optimal diet, but common on the Western diet.
What you eat today, he says, is out tomorrow. And it is amazing to me. You know, I've been practicing internal medicine and for 26 years, and now preventive medicine for the last 10, 11 years. And it's amazing to me to hear from some of my patients how they may not have a bowel movement for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Some of my patients have even told me that they'll have one bowel movement a week. And when we really look at the health implications there, it is really dramatic. We actually know from clinical studies that there's a significant difference in the health and the longevity between people that eat more plant-based foods versus people that eat the standard American meals, you know, which is basically meat and dairy. There's weight differences. The people that eat more meat and dairy are always consistently heavier versus people that eat more plant-based foods are always consistently lighter. They actually, research studies show that they actually live longer, people that eat more plant-based foods. And there's more chronic illness in the individuals that eat more of the standard American meals. We know that diabetes is more common, that heart disease is more common, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, the list really just goes on. And it's interesting, the weight issues are really interesting, because what research has actually shown is that people that eat more of the standard American foods, more meat and dairy, the bacteria in their colon has actually learned to absorb more calories from the food that you eat. And that's really physiologically the reason for these individuals always being heavier. But we get back to the issue of fiber. What are we talking about today? Fiber is the reason why individuals that eat more of the standard American foods are always more constipated. They have more bloating. They have more problems with digestion. And as I just mentioned, more problems with chronic illnesses. The other issue is the fact that there's more risk, although slight, there's still more risk of colorectal cancer in people that eat more dairy and more red meat and more processed meats. The World Health Organization, for those of you who may not have heard this, in the past year, the World Health Organization came out with a position statement that clearly said red meat and processed meats are carcinogens. What that actually means is red meat like steak and processed meats like sausage, hot dogs, bacon, lunch meats all have the potential to cause more colorectal cancer. So if that in and of itself is not a reason for the individuals to really start to shift away from the standard American foods, I don't know what is, because there are so many individuals that naturally, even though they do the right things, get cancer. In this scenario, we know what actually causes cancer, and we really should do something about it. The other issue with eating red and processed meats is the fact that when we grill out, that seems to be an American pastime. When we're cooking foods at really high temperatures, and certainly on the barbecue, there's a higher incidence of carcinogens or cancer-causing substances being created in the food before you even eat it. The other issue that came up was that Hans talked about was soluble fiber versus insoluble fiber, the ones that you can absorb, the ones that you can't absorb, and how that actually relates to bowel movements, to the movement of waste through the GI tract, and also to the production of prebiotics and probiotics. That question comes up a lot. What's a prebiotic? What's a probiotic? Prebiotics are foods that you eat that actually feed the bacteria in your colon. Probiotics are foods that you eat that actually feed us. So when we're eating a high fiber meal, when we're eating lots of plant-based foods, we're actually feeding nutrition to ourselves and to the good bacteria that's in the colon that's supposed to be there. When you're not following those tenets, if you will, when you're eating less plant-based foods, you have more risk for many of the colon problems, which I will list. We're going to look at one more video that talks about diverticular disease.
Now, let me show you the effects of a water-holding high-fiber diet in some other areas. Here you see two colons. The lumen of colon number 1 remains wide open because the high fiber content hydrates the stool. In contrast, the lumen of colon 2 is narrowed because of the low fiber content. This then causes dehydration, and with that, cause the waste material to be compressed, firm, if not hard and small. As a result, the colon must contract with extra force to move it along and expel it. And that puts extra pressure on the wall of the colon. And it's this pressure increase that may lead to outpoachings in the colonic wall, characteristic of diverticulosis. Of course, when this becomes infected, this can turn very painful. Here then are the facts about diverticulosis. Diverticulosis is uncommon before age 40, but about 1/3 of all Americans will develop the condition by age 60, and 2/3 will have it by age 85. That makes diverticulosis one of the most common medical conditions in the United States today. So, what are some of the contributing causes? Among the contributing causes listed are industrialization, economic development, grain refinement, and a low-fiber diet, leading to low fecal weight and long transit time, leading to increased intracolonic pressure and those very outpouchings.
So that's really important. You know, the transit time really makes a big difference to all of these colon problems developing, high risk of cancer. The other colon problems, in addition to diverticulosis, which are the little pockets that Hans talked about, we hear about irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, colon polyps, colon cancer. So many things can go wrong in the intestines, but the good thing to think about is the fact that we can do something about it to lower the risk, to lower the incidence of all of those illnesses simply by changing what we eat. And it really is amazing to me, and I've seen this over the years. People will come in with all sorts of GI problems and even some problems with depression. And when they change their diet, because they're affecting the colon in such a significant way, they start to clear up their irritable bowel syndrome problems and symptoms. Their inflammatory bowel disease seems to get better. Their mental state gets better because the place where you make the major amount of serotonin, which is an antidepressant chemical, is in your GI tract. So treating your intestines and treating your colon the way that we should, in a healthy way, solves so many health problems that I just mentioned, including depression and other mental health problems. So, and actually, before we get on to the last video, I want to actually thank Hans and Darren Morton and Dr. Avery, who we've seen in the past, because the videos that are available on the CHIP website are so helpful, not only for the facilitators, for me certainly, for this program that we're doing, but for all the people that are involved in CHIP, because there has been so much time and effort put into making these videos, and the educational impact and the knowledge that we can get from listening to these videos over and over again and sharing them with people is so dramatic. So thank you for this whole team that really helps us move this process along. So the last video that we're going to look at is by Darren. And oftentimes in commercials, they say, don't try this at home, but we want you to try this at home. So we'll look at this last video and then we'll get on to some questions.
So what we've learned is there are so many benefits to increasing the fibre intake in our diet. Now, Anya, as a dietitian, how easy is that to do?
Darren, it's not difficult at all. Now, we've got 1 cup of cornflakes here. It's about 1 gram, actually less than 1 gram of fibre.
Now, what would we be aiming for over the course of the day?
We're aiming for about 40 grams.
Oh, okay, so that hasn't got me a long way towards my mark yet.
You'd have to eat a lot of cornflakes to get to that.
Right, so what can I do?
What you could do is simply replace the cornflakes with some oatmeal. 1 cup of oatmeal is about 4 grams of fibre. But you can do even better. You can just add half a cup of raspberries, and you've doubled that again, so you've got 8 grams of fibre. Okay, well that's breakfast. Let's look at a main meal. So what we've got prepared here is spaghetti, just a normal spaghetti and about half a cup of tomato-based sauce.
Okay.
Not a lot of fibre, it's about 5 grams.
What can I do to up my fibre?
Well, very easily you could substitute with whole wheat pasta, so you've got about 8 grams of fibre. But we can do much better than that. So you can add half a cup of lentils, stir it through the sauce, and here we've got 16 grams of fibre.
Okay, so if I were to add some meat to this dish, how would that affect my fibre intake?
Animal products don't contain any fibre at all, so you really want to go for whole plant-based foods.
So there you have it, folks. It's often said, don't try this at home. Well, we encourage you. Try this out at home, simple to do, increase your fibre intake, and your body will thank you for it.
I have to work on that accent. I love his accent. He's so good. So thank you to Darren for that. It's really very simple when we think about the things that we can do to stay healthy. And I think the short answer is just eat, when it comes to food, just eat whole foods. Try to stay away from as many processed foods as you can. Try to eat as many whole foods, things that are naturally grown, foods that come out of the ground and that don't come out of a box or a bag or a plant, a facility, a factory, if you will. The type of plants that you want to eat are the ones that come out of the ground. The type of foods that you want to eat are the ones that come out of the ground, not come out of a factory farm, if you will. So we have a few minutes left for questions. I think this is a great question that came in about snacks and traveling. What type of snacks can you eat when you're traveling? We all know that when we're on the road, in America especially, it seems like it's a little different in Europe. They have different gas stations, if you will, that actually have better food. But we really can't get food per se, or at least healthy food, when we're on the road. If you go into a typical gas station, you're going to find mostly processed foods. Occasionally, you'll find a place that might have some fruit, some bananas or apples, or really not too many other fruits. But most of the stuff that you're going to get is food products that are in a bag or a box or processed hot dogs and things like that, which I mentioned are really unhealthy. So what I think the short answer is, when you know that you're traveling, be mindful about what you're going to bring with you, as opposed to just stopping on the road for something to eat. Put a cooler in the car, bring some fruit, bring some vegetables. You can bring some raw vegetables with you, bring some other snacks. You can bring some nuts and grains. Whole grains are great when you're on the road. Bring a few bottles of water. So I think the answer is just to be mindful about your trip and bring the foods with you that you know are healthy. The same thing when you're going to travel on a plane. The airports are usually the same problem as the gas stations. They really don't always have a lot of healthy food. So be mindful, be prepared, bring the foods with you that you know will be healthy. Would you agree with the statement by Michael Pollan? If you have not read his book, you definitely should. He says, eat whole foods, mostly plants, and not too much. I absolutely agree with that statement. I think it's a fabulous statement because, number one, it says eat whole foods. That's what we should do for most of the time when we're eating. Obviously, sometimes we get off track, but we should do that most of the time. Eat mostly plants and not too much. I think the beauty of eating plant-based foods is you really can't eat too much. I don't counsel my patients on counting calories or looking at portion control, because when you look at whole foods, they're highly nutritious, they're low in calories, but they're really very bulky. So you really can't overeat when you're eating a plant-based diet, because you'd be stuffed and your stomach would be full before you really ate too many calories. Is yogurt a good probiotic? The short answer, I believe, is no. The reason being is, number one, traditional yogurt is dairy-based, so we have to worry about the contaminants that are in dairy, all of the pesticides and antibiotics and hormones and fecal material and bacteria and viruses. The list just goes on and on. We know that dairy contributes more to osteoporosis and other health problems. So if you're looking for a good probiotic, what should you do? The best thing that you can do is eat fermented foods. Eat kimchi, sauerkraut, fermented pickles. Anything that you can ferment has natural bacteria growing in it, and that's going to be healthier than looking at yogurt as an option, or even taking a probiotic pill, because oftentimes the bacteria that's in probiotic pills is either not the amount that it says on the label, or even most importantly, not alive any longer. If the bacteria is not alive, it's not going to contribute and grow in the microbiome that you're trying to replicate. What can you take to reduce gassy symptoms? Sometimes when you're transitioning from the traditional standard American diet into more of a plant-based diet, if you're going too quickly and you're all of a sudden eating a lot more plant-based foods, you will get more gas. So I oftentimes will tell people, just slow down. Don't introduce as many at one time. You can take some of these Gas-X pills, which often help. If you're eating a lot of beans, you can soak the beans overnight, which decreases the gas. So there are things that you can do that really will make a difference. And as Hans said at the beginning of the program, it usually takes a while for your GI tract to get used to all of these fibers that you're eating, to change from the traditional bacteria that's grown in the standard American gut to what you would see in someone that eats more plant-based food. So take it slower, but consistently move in that direction so that you're eating more and more plant-based foods as each day goes on. I want to thank everyone again for participating. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to the facilitators for really imparting all this knowledge to the people that are participating in your CHIP programs. Thank you to all of the CHIP individuals, the members, the people that have graduated. Continue to be involved, because health is a journey. It's not a destination. We have to continue to do this lifelong so that we can live longer, we can live healthier, and we can live with more vitality. So thanks to everyone for participating today. God bless you all, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.